You're listening to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall. Well, folks, welcome back. I am excited to be sitting here with my client, Jan, who has just the most amazing story and delivers it with a smile. She really is a special individual. We love having her here at Bride and Community with the other survivors here. And I'll tell you what, her story is just incredible. If you have not heard her story, go back in our archives, which you can find at bridemovement.com on our podcast page, or anywhere that our podcast is being archived, such as iTunes and Blog Talk Radio, etc. And you can find Journeying with Jan. There's a whole series, and there's also a few other podcasts that have her name on them that were individually titled. And she has been working with me for several years. She is a survivor of satanic ritual abuse. She is a survivor of government-sponsored mind control projects. She's a survivor of Mengele, and she's here to talk about it. And so, Jan, welcome back to Discovering Truth.
Hi, Dan. It's so good to be back. Thank you so much for inviting me to share another part of my story. And it's just a blessing. It's a blessing to be part of your ministry. It's a blessing to be a client, a survivor, a client of yours. And it's just a blessing to be here today to talk to all the folks. So thank you.
Well, Jan, you're a champion and you're changing lives. And I just am so proud of you for continuing to be brave, to take your journey, to learn things that are just a little bit uncomfortable to know. And frankly, I applaud you. And, you know, you have quite a bit to share with us today. Jan and I actually, folks, had a little bit of a debate before we got started with the recordings. Jan thinks that she can get through her notes for today's podcast. And I said, I don't, but we'll find out, because either one, you will have a horrible, terrible cliffhanger at the end of this podcast, forcing you to come back and listen again at some point in the future, or two, she's going to prevail. And so we will find out. But Jan, here's what we're going to start. We're going to start by doing a bit of review and letting you give us an overview going back to 1984 and some of the journey that you've taken to get you here.
Thank you, Dan. And I might have to talk really fast to get all this in, but I can do it. I know I can do it.
No, take your time. Take your time.
Oh, okay. I'll try to slow it down a little bit. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast was because of all the things that are going on in our world, in our country right now. And I'm seeing a lot of indications that we have a lot of people that are programmed in this country. And I have a feeling that a lot of those people are going to be coming out of programming in the near future. And I'm hoping the church is going to be able to step up and help some of those folks that are going to be, trying to deal with not only their own histories, but people that are trying to deal with the history of our nation and what's going on in the area of mind control and so forth. So that's really my heart, is to help the church to prepare for those kinds of things that are coming. So I wanted to talk about my history a little bit, because in 1984, I had my first sexual abuse memory. And at that point, I really thought I came from a perfect family, had no memories of any kind of abuse at all. And so at that time in history, sexual abuse or incest was considered a conspiracy theory. And so a lot of people just didn't believe that it was real, or that it was as prevalent as it was. And so when we fast forward into the late 80s, early 90s, SRA came on the horizon, and the same thing. People thought it was a conspiracy theory. They didn't believe it. They didn't believe that occults were active and that they were doing sacrifices in this country, of all places. So fast forward again into the 90s, and people started talking about MK Ultra and mind control, a government-sponsored mind control. And again, it was considered a conspiracy theory. Today, we're talking about the secret space programs. And again, it's called a conspiracy theory. So it takes time once these things surface for the public to come around and be able to accept. And so that's where I think we are right now. We're getting ready to go through another one of those walls of amnesia and discord about what is true and what is false. And so that's why I'm here today, to give this testimony of my own.
And I'm excited that that's why you're here, Jan, because I'm going to say this. You know that I'm in like the same place, right? And folks, let me say this. If you haven't heard me say it in a while, I talk about something called the false reality overlay. What, to me, that means that there is a false reality that we are fed, force fed, in fact, through edited Facebook posts. Independent fact checkers have verified that this truth is actually a lie with their lies. And the MSM, mainstream media, MSNBC, ABC, CNN, Clinton News Network, right? All of these bombardments, plus our history books, which are completely rewritten by scholars that were on payrolls with the Illuminati and related groups. I mean, I don't know. This all this defrauding, and we've got this view of the world created for us that's entirely inaccurate, and has caused us to completely disregard, testimonies of incest, mind control on a government level, complete puppeting of, world leaders, Illuminati cults working behind the scenes to direct the path the nations are taking. And you know what? It's all wrong. And I believe that, honestly, Jan, in the coming years, there's going to be a greater unmasking of this nonsense than like at any other single point in recent history. I'm right there with you. And folks, that's why Bride exists. I just have to say it. We are getting ready for the monsoon of survivors coming out and having their programming breakdown. Anyway, thank you, Jan.
I totally believe that, Dan. And I have to say, in 1985, I started my journey of recovery and healing from the trauma and the abuse. And from the very get-go, I wanted to give my testimony. I had no idea how to do that. Within a year after my first memory, a woman showed up in our hometown. She was working on her master's degree about sexual abuse, and she was looking for survivors that would tell their story. So I gave her my testimony, and she printed it in our local paper. Now, it was anonymous. Nobody knew who it belonged to, but it was the experience of doing that, I think, started me out on a really good foot as far as healing. It gave me a boost. Giving your testimony is a boost in healing. I believe that wholeheartedly. Here I am making podcasts now, all these years later. And it's like the Lord has just opened those doors. And it's such a privilege and an honor to be able to do that. And so I thank you again. So in 2013, I had moved to Northern Michigan, and I didn't have any friends here. I had no church. I had a counselor downstate that I'd been with for 8 years, and she called me one day and said that she had leukemia and that she was going to have a bone marrow transplant and that we would not be able to do any more counseling sessions. And so it was just another time in a long line of stops that I had to navigate with counseling, because when you're in counseling for a whole lot of years, which I've been in for 36 years now, I've been through 12 coaches, I've been through extended hospital stays, I've been through a lot of 6 intensives that I had to travel to get to. And so probably overall, I've been in counseling probably, I would say, between 80 and 90% of the time uh, over the last 36 years. So in that time, there were a lot of stops and starts that I had to navigate. So I started looking for another counselor, and it's just not always easy. There aren't, even today, it's still difficult to find counselors that are experienced in this kind of trauma. And so it's always a challenge. So I started looking, and I found a man that was willing to work with me through email just temporarily. He wasn't taking on new clients, so he helped me for a while. But right in the middle of that, I got bombarded with some voice to skull um, programming. And for your listeners, voice to skull is a kind of technology where they beam right into your head the voice of usually somebody you're familiar with. It's not usually a bad person, it's somebody you're familiar with and you care about. And then you develop this relationship with this voice, thinking it's the real person. And then usually when you start getting suspicious and start doubting whether this is the real person or not, then they'll introduce a second person and they'll call that person the real person. So for instance, if it were Dan Duvall, I would hear the voice of Dan Duvall. And when I got suspicious of that, I'd hear another voice, which was the real Dan Duvall. Mm-hmm. Now you're in a state of confusion because you don't know if it's the false Dan Duvall or the real Dan Duvall, and they're both false, but you don't know that when you're in the middle of it. It's a horrendous, horrible kind of attack that they do. The Lord had told me in the middle 90s that the biggest challenge we'll face in the end days is discerning his voice, is knowing the true voice of Jesus or the Father. And I believe that this technology is one of the things that they will use more and more because they have it now. And I think they're coupling it now with AI and quantum computers. So they're actually mining the thoughts of people and how they interact with their God. And then they can beam that back into our heads so that we think we're actually talking to God when we're not. So that's the attack that I came under in the middle of that email counseling that I did with this man. And so I finally, out of desperation and just fear, really fear, walked away from that because it was too much. It was just too hard to navigate. So I finally found a coach that lived in Wisconsin, just across the border from me. And she had about 30 years of experience. And so she had a little bit of experience with SRA. She didn't know anything about government programs, but we started working together, and it was a good relationship. We got a lot of work done, but we started to kind of hit the wall after about 3 years, and I actually started getting into some of the astral aspects of my programming and my parts. So in 2014, I found Bride. I found some podcasts that you had done. So I went to the ministry page on your website, and you were booked out. Oh my gosh, you were booked way out, months in advance. So I gave up on that in 2014. But in 2018, on Easter Sunday, I somehow wandered over to your website again, and I thought, I'm just going to see if he's got any openings. And I couldn't believe it. You had an opening. So boy, I signed up. Signed up for that opening. And the first time I saw you, you unhitched me from I don't know how many Earth systems all over the world. It was amazing. And so at the end, you said, well, you might have another opening. So I went back and I looked, and there was another opening. So I grabbed it. And so I was praying, because I had been praying for probably 10 years. I was fed up with counseling that I had to train everybody up on. And I had given the Lord a mandate. I'm like, Lord, if I'm going to keep doing this, I have to have the best. I have to have the best. I can't settle anymore. It's too much.
Just tell you, this is what hurts me, Jan. This is what hurts my heart, because there are survivors all over the world, and this is what they do. They sit down in front of somebody. They say, listen, I am trying to survive because I'm defecting from the Illuminati and they want to kill me with frequencies. Oh, oh, you silly Sally, you. There's no such thing as the Illuminati. What the heck is that? I mean, folks, this to me makes me want to, I tell people, you're not crazy. It's all of these people out there that think their false reality overlay is real, that are crazy. It's a complete script flip in my mind, but my heart breaks, Jan, for what you've and others have had to go through. It's like, listen, my parts are working in laboratories with reptilians right now, engineering hybrid children. Oh, you silly Sally, there's no such thing as, I can see your face right now. You're getting upset because of it's triggering. This breaks my heart, folks. That's why we exist. And we have coaches, by the way. If you didn't know, there are trained and selected coaches that are not me, but they have been trained by me at coach.bridemovement.com because we're tired of the nonsense and we're fighting for you guys. Anyway, please continue, Jan.
Dan, that is one of the things I appreciate about you so much, is that you are not hoarding the knowledge that you have. You are sharing it and you're pushing it out there as fast as you can. And it's going to pay off dividends because people need help. People need a lot of help, and it's coming. It's there now. I'm so glad for your classes. It's wonderful. So, I'm not unusual in the way that, most, like you said, most survivors have this long history, and when you have to go through coaches like we have to go through coaches, it gets pretty frustrating after a while because some people you can only go so far with. My first counselor I had was a psychologist. I had him for 6 years, weekly, lots of money. And when my part showed up and I took him in my notes, he said, well, I think the jury's still out on that. I'm like, what? The jury's not out in my head, I can tell you that much. I have parts and they have names and they have stories. And that's the truth. So anyway, I kind of
Did I help? Okay. So you found me, and we booked a couple of appointments. And so at that point, you sent me a whole bunch of, this is what I remember. You sent me a whole bunch of material, programming history. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the programming history.
I do want to talk about programming history because my programming started in the early 50s. So, a lot of it's outdated now for the young people that are coming up, but the programming that I went through ended up being the foundations for what they're doing now. So I think it's still relevant to maybe be to know about the programming that I went through, in the sense that it does form the foundations and you kind of can see where it's gone from there. So basically, I see it as there were two streams of programming in my life, and I consider myself programmed still today because we haven't finished our work and I still have parts that are out there doing government jobs, different places. But the two streams would be the occult stream, which is the rituals. Hypnosis is used a lot. Drugs are used, and all to cause dissociation. So the government programs are to prepare us for jobs, because once the dissociation is done and the parts are split off and we have all these soul parts, then jobs are usually assigned. And those can be a whole variety of things. The goals of programming would be to split the soul and the spirit so that they're not just working with one person, one entity. They're working with many, many, many. And I know I was polyfragmented, what they call polyfragmented. And so I've got thousands, who knows how many, I have no idea. But I don't think I'm unusual at all. I think that's pretty common these days, especially that, you have that many parts out there. The amnesia makes the compartmentalization, and they do it through trauma to create the personalities. But I think anymore, the personalities aren't even as important as just the fragments, just the soul fragments. I had personalities that were in my front row that had names and had memories of part of my history, but I have thousands of parts that are out there doing jobs that don't even have names. They're just out there like clones or something. So psychic weaponization is also one of the goals of the programming, so that they can use us in astral travel and in spiritual warfare, witchcraft especially. In my family I had a lineage and a history of witchcraft. So I was trained up in a lot of things concerning witchcraft. There's an indoctrination that happens. And in my case, it was a Nazi indoctrination into the Nazi theologies, if you will. And there's also a lot of false religious things that are put on. In my case, I was really programmed for the end times. That was my whole focus of everything they did, was on the end times, because they believe there's an end times, but they believe they can control it. So they have plans to put out their own agendas to bring about the end times. And they think they can force God's hand so that they can control the timing of everything. And which I'm sure you believe that, and I'm sure.
Oh, I know. Absolutely. They are trying to force God's hand. They're trying to create entire counterfeit timelines by manipulating events in the earth.
Yeah.
Which I could talk about at length, but I'm not here to interview me, Jan. I'm here to interview you.
Well, the
Why
time.
don't you just take a, actually,
Mhm.
I want to just take a few minutes and let you talk about a couple of the, I guess, anecdotal pieces of evidence you have connecting your end time programming to agendas that people have actually either A, watched in the past, or B, are watching.
Wow. Well, the rapture is one big one for them. They're always trying to, I would call it, whip up excitement and or fear about the rapture, and that the world's getting ready to burn, and here we are unprepared. And so they're always trying to push that agenda forward in one way or another. I went through an initial deprogramming with the Lord after I came to the Lord in 95. And my whole, that whole 3-week period of time it was like I was embedded in a whole end time scenario of programming. And it was amazing. It was like I was totally convinced that we were getting ready to rapture at any moment. And it was the programming that had kicked in. So everything that I dealt with during those 3 weeks was like, the trumpet's going to blow. We're going to be out of here. It's going to be over, And so it was pretty crazy. So that's, for me personally, that's probably the biggest thing about the end time programming, is the rapture issue. So.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So this job training.
So that's their goals for us is to make sure we're trained to do jobs. And for me personally, I think a lot of my parts have ended up in laboratories, and I think I worked on a lot of technology things, which is really kind of crazy because I don't feel like I have a technology inclination in my presenter at all. But I have a lot of parts, I think, that are working in those kinds of jobs. I've also found out I have jobs that are, or parts that are working off planet in jobs and in government offices like the Pentagon, the Capitol, places like that. They also do a lot of training for warfare, especially in the ones that come from witchcraft, because they are doing witchcraft on us all the time. We as Christians probably don't pray as much as we should, but I guarantee you they are praying daily and because they are trying to control everything. And so they're good at warfare, and they are consistent and they're diligent to do it. So
basically, folks, what Jan is saying is she was polyfragmented in her soul, and these fragments not only were trained through the mind control to do jobs within her own system that's in her subconscious and body, but outside of her body as well, in other realms and on the astral plane, where her parts are involved in laboratories and even uh, doing jobs in places that are inhabited by physical buildings like the Pentagon. But from the astral realm, that's where you would find these parts doing their work. They're not physically showing up per se. Is that all correct?
yes, absolutely. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the last goal I wanted to talk about was recruitment. And this is really actually a pretty big deal because they're always recruiting, but they're also coercing people into their fold. And so I think really there's been a lot of coercing happening in our government, really, frankly. But they do train us up in doing that. Just as a Christian would be trained up to go out and minister to people or to witness to people. The occult does that too. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the programming and how, for me, that worked, but kind of make it broad enough that I think it's pretty common, probably what I went through. So the programming really started for me in pre-birth. So I came from a lineage of bloodliners, or what they call the kings of the earth, or my DNA was the right DNA. So the pre-birth rituals were done to ensure that that my destiny was secured, and that I would have a purpose in the cult, and that I would carry on the bloodline. So I've done some work with you and have found out that Mingala was part of my history, and which I knew before that, but I've done the work now to retrieve some of those memories. And through those memories, I found out, because Mingala told me when I was a child that I was actually conceived by a Jewish woman and Hitler, who was at the time channeling Satan, because I was to be an antichrist, a potential antichrist. And this goes back to those agendas, those end time agendas that they're always working on. They're always preparing antichrist in the wings so that they're ready at any moment, so that they can, they've got their finger on the trigger, so to speak, and they've got an antichrist ready to go to launch into action, or to, be on the stage. So I was one of those kids that was conceived that way. It turned out I was a girl, so that didn't work out real well for him. But anyway, I did some talking about that on the last podcast I did. So if anybody's interested in that, they can look that up. I was initiated at 1.5 years, and I have a pretty clear memory of that. And during that time, during that initiation, I was also twinned with my aunt, who's 3 years older than I am. And so that became a lifelong dedication that we would basically watch over each other, report back on each other, and be really entangled. Our lives would be entangled. And you and I have worked on detangling that mess just not that long ago. So recently, I found some early, probably my earliest memories of trauma programming that was done, which I'm going to talk about today. And it had to do with pods, programming pods that they put us in, and used holographic images and then frequencies to back that up, to do trauma on us, to build trauma prisons within our systems. And so that's a very new memory for me. And I believe that happened when I was about 4 years old. So that, I think I would consider that probably the first formal programming that I had that would be part of the government sponsored mind control things.
You know, I just want to point this out, Jan. What year was it when you were 4?
That would have been 1954.
Which means that in 1954, they had developed holographic technologies to the level that they could be utilized in the course of programming project individuals. We didn't even have Atari with Pong in 1954. You know, and I just wanted to point that out because, Jen, you know, there are people that are getting hit 7 ways from Sunday by every kind of technology and bombardment battery. They're targeted individuals. They're getting harassed. And they go to people and they try to explain to them, hey, listen, you know, they have technologies that can read my thoughts with a satellite. And they're like, there's no technology out there like that. That's that idiocy, that crazy making, you know, group that listens to MSNBC that I was talking about before, because the cognitive dissonance that it takes to learn that they have holographic technologies they can program people with in 1954, before the release of Atari and Pong, is like, what do you think they have in 2021 that they didn't tell us about? I mean, really? How much cognitive dissonance does it take to believe that they only have the iPad and the MacBook? I mean, are you kidding me? You know, this is what drives me crazy, Jan. I don't know about you. Anyway, please continue. So programming with holograms in 1954. Yeah. What else?
And I have to tell you, I don't think we even had color TV in 1954.
Or you did not? I
don't remember it until about 1956 or 7. So that is way back there. So the other thing they do is with the trauma is like my dad committed a murder, which is, you know, I explained all that on the first podcast that I did. And he also raped me when I was 7. So those things created trauma. But I would say those traumas were more a target of the occult part of my life. So I had a local handler that was a doctor, and he did hypnosis on me back after those traumas. And so that started my history with him, which was lifelong, and really until he died. So there's a difference in the trauma that they create through programming and a trauma that they create in the home, say, or in rituals or occult meetings or so forth. But for me, it was like, and I think this might be true for most survivors, maybe it was a dual track. So the things that were happening in the cult meetings were enabling the programming that they were doing on the government side. So they meshed together in a lot of ways. And yet, in my case, the handler that I had at a local level, who was an occult person, was a little bit in competition, I would say, with the government faction that was giving me jobs to do and controlling that programming. So I haven't sorted all of that out yet, but I'm starting to get a pretty good feel for how those two things kind of paralleled and worked together, and at times were in contrast to each other. So the training is for several different reasons. For screening out the kids that can do the work, that have the esoteric giftings, if you will, to be able to do the dissociation and the astral and all of that. Training for how many of them can endure the programming, survive the programming, and be able to handle that. Indoctrination into the theologies, if you will, of like the Nazi, can't think of the word you'd call that, but indoctrinations into those things.
Yeah.
And the soul trades are another part of the occult programming. And once we are split and there are lots and lots of pieces, it's like cash for them. They can actually sell our parts into jobs and programs, and off planet, on planet, under the planet, you name it. And they are always making deals, and they are always looking for more people, parts to put into jobs and to enslave, really. So I did a little bit of work on that with you, with shadow people, which was part of a podcast I did, the last podcast I think I did. And so my souls have been, we've been finding soul parts all over the creation, it seems like. And I don't know when we'll find them all, because I don't know how many there are left to find, but I think there are a lot. So NASA was one of the areas that I was programmed in at a pretty early age. And I just had some work on this and found out that there were a lot of memory exercises where you would have to memorize lots of numbers or phrases or words, and then you were tested on those. And if you didn't get it right, then you had to go back through this kind of like a psychic driving, I think, and memorize again. And it was over and over and over and over until you finally got it right. And then they would take me to a ritual to seal all that in and build an amnesia wall so that I would not remember at a conscious level what I had just memorized. And so I had a part that kind of explained a lot of that to me, which was very, very helpful. So the computer was installed in that way, where it was just a lot of memorization and compartmentalizing of all that information, and then buried deep under amnesia walls. So also at the NASA facility, I went through a program of, they were trying to figure out how to get us to breathe underwater. It sounds so bizarre, but we would actually take very, very, very small breaths of water and then exhale out. And it was not good. And I think children probably died during those experiments. And I remember when my part came out and told about that they did, that was not a good thing at all. It was not pleasant, and it was traumatic, really. The whole thing was traumatic. So about that same time that they were doing those experiments, they were experimenting with us on astral travel, so that they were sending us out to spy out planets. At that time, they were trying to figure out if there was anybody established on Mars, or the moon or some of the closer planets in. And so we were being trained to go spy out those planets so that they could establish uh, bases there. And that was in the late 50s, the very early 60s. So
That is a mouthful. But you're not done yet, are you?
I'm not. I'm not. So when I was 8 or 9, I was taken to Colorado, where Mingala had a laboratory. And that's where he told me about my own conception. He did a lot of grooming on me, used me in the lab, trained me up in some things in the lab, which I'm still not sure what kinds of things he trained me for. I know that I was like an assistant, sort of, if you can think of a child as an assistant to a doctor. But I was also being used there in the astral, and I did a podcast on this. The last podcast, it was about Tibet and going to Tibet in the astral, and that was under the direction of Mingala. So I would have been, I was 14 when that memory happened, and so I was working with him on some level between the ages of 8 and 9 and up to age 14. So I don't know if it was all that whole time or if it was just on and off. By this time, I had been trained in the astral enough that I didn't have to be, in person, flesh and blood to do the work. They would just call me in. So along about that time when I was 14, I was being taken to Omaha, Nebraska, to a SAC base. And I still don't have the memories of that. I don't know what they were training me for there, but we lived not that far from Omaha. And so I know I was taken there on a pretty regular basis, but I don't have the memories of it yet. So just this week, we found out about some work that I encountered in Europe when I was in Europe. I was 21 when I was there, and I actually was approached by a guy who was what I would call a screener, and then he hooked me up with a CIA person, and so I just got the first memory of that encounter, and so I'm still working to process through all that new information on that. I also know that I spent 4 years in the Air Force, so I had a lot of time. We only worked 3.5 hours a day the whole time I was in the Air Force, and I don't have hardly any memories of my days in the Air Force, what I did, where I went, who I hung out with. And that's always, for me, when I don't have memories of my history, then that's number one clue. I was probably doing things, other parts were doing things in my place. So I'm pretty sure I was used pretty extensively there for, I don't know what, but anyway. Once I got discharged from the Air Force, I came back home, and I was 27 years old at that point. And my local handler, which had been handling me my whole life, but sending me to these government locations for programming, he was mad because the CIA had sort of taken charge, and he was losing footing as far as controlling my jobs and the way I was being used. And so that ended up in quite a mess, and he ended up killing, quote unquote, a bunch of my parts, trying to get control again. And the CIA came in and ended up rescuing the part that was left in charge by creating a new part, which turned out to be me. So that's another whole story I want to go into if we have time. Mm-hmm. So Anyway, that's kind of my history of that dual track of being part of a local coven handled by an occult high priest, and at the same time being taken to bases and locations where I was coming under MK Ultra mind control. And so those two things were being done simultaneously through all those years. So I don't, at least until I was 27. And because I have parts that are still places off planet working on jobs, I know that, just to whatever extent, I'm still being used. So there you have it.
But you are showing up and getting more Jesus all the time. So, Jan, I assume you want to talk about some of the rescues that are going on with these parts that we have been able to get to.
Dan, the work I've done with you, I have to say, has been fun and exciting. It's not always easy, but I have to say it has been fun and exciting. And I'm like, you can't make this stuff up. It is just crazy. But it's because Jesus comes in and always is doing things to make me laugh, whether it's, wearing some crazy outfit or, carrying some crazy tool or weapon, or he's always doing something funny. And so it just really helps to get past the funky stuff to have him on board, and he's always there.
Jan, I love that way that you bring that out. People, believe it or not, have on a few occasions been offended by me. I can never figure out why, but one of the reasons that people have been offended by me is they say this: Daniel, you are way too happy to be talking about things such as mind control and the New World Order. You're supposed to be angry, upset, and miserable. And my problem is that I get to see Jesus do the coolest things all the time. And interestingly enough, he doesn't take them very seriously, Jan. We get to see his opinion of the devil on a regular basis. And that opinion is reflected very accurately in Psalm chapter 2, where it says, "The Lord sits in the heavens and laughs as he holds his enemies in derision." And we get to see that side of Jesus all the time. And, I just, anyway, I apologize if I have offended you with my joy, listening audience, but what can I say?
Just get over. He is so much fun. I have to say, he's a lot of fun. And you spend a lot of time with him, I think, because you're fun too. So here's some of the places that we've found my parts so far. The Pentagon, the Vatican, Tavistock Institute, the Capitol, DUMS, underground bases, Colorado, in hybrid programs, off planet. I found them at Jupiter, Mars, the moon, Sirius. We found them under the earth, in the inner earth, and we found a lot of souls, not only mine, but other soul parts in Satan's realms of torture. And those are pretty amazing memories and work that we've done. So Jesus made it clear to me from the very beginning that there was no way out of this except to follow him, because he's the only one that had the map. He's the only one that knew how to get out of it. And so I've tried to just do that. And our sessions put that to a test every week because he doesn't always travel in a straight line. he does a lot of zigzagging and circling around, circling back, as Biden's assistant might say. But following him is the only way we get to the answer. And we do get to the answer every time. But I don't have a confidence about that until the last 3 minutes of our session, because the rest of the time, I'm not sure where we are usually. So, but I'm getting used to it. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was what I brought up a minute ago about my local handler and the CIA and the problems that caused. So I came into a session with you just recently, really, and I had a part show up that was antagonistic, and I don't come across too many of those yet, but this one definitely was not in a good mood that day. And I knew that right off, because when you offered him living water and bread of life, he spit the water on the ground. I never told you that, but I saw it. And in my mind,
let me just explain this for those of you that are not understanding what's being said here. So Jan has a soul part on the inside of her that comes forward. And typically when I am engaging with soul parts, I will offer them bread of life to eat and living water to drink. Why would I do that? Well, because that bread of life has Jesus in it. And I'm just trying to get Jesus in the parts. So I'm going to give them that bread of life and that living water. And the truth is, because it's in the spirit realm, the bread of life will shapeshift into any kind of food, like favorite foods. So it could be cookies and milk, it could be pizza, tacos, burrito, I've seen it turn into all this different, and it's always delicious, smells good. Sometimes the bread of life is so wonderful, but the parts are so stubborn. I'll just put it on a table right next to them, bolt the table to the floor, bolt the food to the table, and so you could just smell it until you would like to enjoy it. You don't have to eat it, just smell it, because when you're hungry and you smell really delicious food, it messes with your mind. And just remember, trying to just get Jesus into these people. So I'm always given the bread of life and the living water. And so on this particular day, one of Jan's parts comes forward and decides to be stubborn and spit it out. And so this is all happening inside of her person with her soul parts. Anyway, please continue.
I don't think you've ever had to do that with my parts yet. Usually when Dan gives my parts the bread of life, they eat it like they haven't eaten for 50 years. I'm telling, like they're starving, just starving. So when this guy spit it out, I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble here. And so as the hour wore on, he was mad. He was really mad. And so Dan is, in his way of gently pressing in to find out where all this anger is coming from. And it came out that he was mad at me, Jan, the outside person, because he said I was just a piece of paper and a drawing. That's all I was. I wasn't even a real person. So I'm like, uh-oh, this is not good, because I really always considered myself a real person. So anyway, after that session was over and we dealt with this guy, his name was Ranger. I have a part named John who's a pretty significant part of my system, and he's always helping a lot of times with different things. And I had this connection with John where I felt there was shame, because John was there when I was created, and John felt shame about that. So the next session we had, I took that to Dan. I like, we might need to figure out what this is all about. So what it was about was when I was 27 years old, I had come out of the Air Force, and I had this local handler, which I didn't know about, of course, because, that was all under amnesia. So he showed up at my door one day, and one of my parts came out to challenge him, and he ended up just giving us a medication and drugged us and took us off and put us through 3 days of torture. Ended up killing all of my parts and left John in charge of the body. And John had never been in charge of the body. So at the time that this happened, I was dating a guy that was from Texas. And I didn't know him that well, but we were having this relationship. And after my handler brought me back home, he said I was going to be sick for a few days, and just to tell everybody I'd had the flu. Well, I was sick because I'd been through all this trauma and torture. And so I was sick. And this guy from Texas was right there to help me. And so come to find out, this guy from Texas, I believe, was a CIA officer. And I believe he was there to try to make sure that even though I was back home, that I was on my handler's turf, that I still was connected to the CIA and the commitments and agreements I had made with them. So he made an agreement with the CIA officer, made an agreement with John to create a new part to take over so that John could get relief, because John just could not handle the day-to-day of my life at that time. So he created another Jan. So by the end of the session, we had actually 4 Jans. I counted them up. four different Jans that were operating. And I've always been aware of 2 of them, but I wasn't aware of the other 2. So that's all new information for me. So during this session, I had a part come forth that brought this information about the programming that was done at the NASA facility back east when I was 6.5 years old. And so she filled in a lot of the information about how that programming was done through the memorization and the testing. She also talked about they had this program with Tinker Toys. And so it ended up being like a quantum, I think some kind of a quantum configuration. And we had to memorize all the connections. So every time there was a hub, then you had maybe however many connections off of that. And then you had connections to those connections. So it was quite an extensive test of memorizing. She also told us about shots that I was getting shots at that time, because they would put us in a semi-conscious state to do this work. And we asked Jesus Dan asked Jesus what were in those shots, and he said it was the neural exciters. And I looked that up after the session. I went to look it up to see what that was all about. And MSG turns out to be a neural exciter, and I have a real sensitivity toward that, and have some real health challenges because of it. So I think that probably, came. I think I probably ended up with sensitivities to it because I was exposed to it so early on as a child. So that, at this point in my counseling, we're filling in the spaces. It's like I have a general framework, but there's lots of gaps still and lots of places that have to be filled in. And so it's my picture, my overall picture is becoming more and more and more clear, which is wonderful. It's wonderful. The work is easier than it was 5 years ago, than it was 10 years ago, and a lot more fun.
Well, and this is, I found what you just said to be particularly fascinating as we were exploring the whole situation with your part, Patty, because as someone that works with many survivors, I've run into a lot of internal computers. When people say they turned me into a computer, for the average person, that sounds like gibberish and nonsense. You're a person. I see a human in front of me, beard, right? Nose, 2 ears, clearly not a computer. But the computer is on the inside, and it can be accessed by handlers that have access codes or keys or backdoors. And it can be used for whatever purposes that computer is designed for. So how do they get the computer inside of the person? That was always my question, because I've done reading and heard computers reference people being turned into computers many times, and it's just like, but how do they do it? That was my prevailing question. And then with Patty's information and understanding, yeah, it actually involved, for you back in the 50s, rote memorization. I mean, they were doing testing, rituals, drugs, and you also mentioned the slideshow they'd put on your head, where it's just like pictures that were nonsensical just passing through. You have to like watch this, and then they ask you questions, and uh yeah, more rituals. And I realized, okay, yeah, these computers are actually manually installed in people. Now that may be different thanks to the onset of quantum technologies and energetic technologies, and the way that they're able to mind map people and access their brainwave frequencies and stuff I don't know about necessarily. But I do want to say this, Jan. you know uh as you were going through this, especially when you hit the Tinker Toys part, you had something really interesting that you said, and I'm going to repeat it and then let you comment on it. You said, you were trained to think on multiple dimensions. That is not just 3 dimensions with those Tinker Toys. The shapes and the formations, the geometries were helping you as a child to break out of the 3-dimensional thinking and go higher. And you said they're taking children as high as 11 dimensions. And I just want to let you talk a little bit about that, because this has huge implications for where deprogramming work is going to go in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, that I think that was actually Jesus that dropped that in my spirit, that they are operating on 11 dimensions now. And I know for me, Patty, I forget, was she 4 or 4, I think. So that would have been early, early on for me. And that computer that was put in then, I dealt with, Jesus helped me start deprogramming on that in 95. It was called a Beast computer. And he gave me codes, pages and pages of codes, and then gave me the eraser codes to remove those codes. And it was extensive. It was very extensive. So I've been since 95 also wondering, how was this put in? How did this get in there? And I'm just now finding that out since 95. So that's how long it takes on some of this stuff to get stuff cleared out enough that you can get the information, that you can get a hold of the information, because it's so protected. They, through the amnesia walls and the trauma, they bury this stuff so deep, and they protect it so well, because they, pretty much all of the parts I had were demonized. They had demons attached to them, and the demons live inside these, inside the systems and inside the cities that are inside. And so it's a challenge to get to any of this information. So as far as the 11 dimensions, I just repeated what I was hearing on that. So I don't doubt that at all, because of what they're doing, because of what they're doing with people in the spiritual realm. In the secret space program, you hear a lot about, what they're doing, and it's amazing, just amazing. And they have to start these kids early to get, of course, they're doing a lot of it, I think, now through technology, whereas mine was all hands-on, in the body more. But amazing, really.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit more about these programming pods?
Okay, so I watched a video, and it was a survivor, and there was something in her video, something that she talked about and explained that caused me to have dreams, and really triggered me. And so I kept seeing these pods that to me look like if you took an egg carton and you turned it upside down so the round part was showing, and then you pinched the center out of those so you had holes in them, and they were stacked like that. So there was 6 or 7 or 8 in a row, and then a second row under that. And in the dream, I knew that as a child, I was being put inside of these things. And so I brought that to you in our counseling session. And as we started working through it, I found out that it was a programming center. It was in Colorado. It happened when I was 4 years old. We lived in Western Kansas at that time, so it wouldn't have been that far to go to take me to Colorado. What would happen was these were big. They were, car size maybe. I mean, the whole, like 7 of them. And so what would happen is they would put you inside of this pod, and then it was equipped with holographic imagery and frequencies. And so basically, you would be traumatized in some way. And they had a lot of different variety, I think. But these pods ended up becoming like torture chambers. And they were producing punishment grids. So they became, on the inside, they became internal prisons. And so we would be go through this programming process. The trauma would be internalized into a location in our systems. And then when we needed to be punished or whatever, they could trigger that through words and codes, and we would be put right back into the same trauma that we had experienced inside of the pod. So this was, I believe, probably the earliest formal programming that I had, even though this would have been about the same time as I was getting this computer installed. So I'm not sure how that all fit together yet. But anyway, as we went through this work, it reminded me of some work that we did on I did a podcast, and it was called Field of Dreams. And this was a punishment grid where if you do something against the family, then they put you on this holographic, like a field, like a football field or something. And you have armies, 2 armies facing each other. And you are on one side, but all of your soldiers are inefficient, or they just don't work. And so you end up facing a whole army of people, and you end up dying. You just end up dying because you can't survive. And it's a punishment grid. And so this was really interesting when this came forth in this last session that we did, that this is how they were starting to do that back when I was 4 years old. And now they're doing it more through technologies. But anyway, that was, they also, a second part of that was that while we were in these pods, and I think this information came from me as an older, either child or adult. So because I was working in these labs, because I was working on technologies, I have information as an older person about the things I experienced as a younger person. So that gets kind of confusing at times, but it's starting to kind of sift out. But the children that were being put into these pods are also being viewed by other family members. And I saw it as like in a TV station where you have all these monitors, and they actually have passcodes where they can get in. And they, the family, the bloodliners that are into the occult, that are born into it and live their whole lives in that, are they have an insatiable thirst for evil and for torture and for pain and for death. And so these chambers that these kids are put into are actually filmed. The torture they go through is filmed, because there is a power that one receives watching something that's happening live versus something that's been filmed or even orchestrated. So I believe there's probably a whole business, if you will, that has cropped up around that kind of use of this technology that they're doing. So this memory that I had being put in the pods also tied back in with in time programming, because they were talking about how once this program is installed inside and parts are sent into to receive this trauma and this torture, sometimes the parts just don't survive. So what we were told is it's like a coral reef. In a coral reef, you have these little creatures that build these little homes, and when they die, they leave their home behind. And that's okay, because it's a beautiful thing. And they have these stories to go along to support all their theology. And so this was one of those things where they were trying to make right what was wrong, basically. And so anyway, they have an underlying theme in their end time teaching that we're doing this torture for you because we want you to be strong. And the end is coming, and not everybody's going to survive. And the ones that are going to survive are the ones that have endured the most. So this pain that we're causing you, this torture that we're doing to you, these horrendous things that you have to experience are for your own good. And this is a theme they use over and over and over and over again.
Wow.
And it's so evil. It's so evil.
Wow.
So,
this reminds me of a theme that came out, and I'm trying to remember the name of the film, but it was actually about a guy who was a survivor, it was called Split. And as the movie progressed, there was this idea that because he abducts these girls, and some of them he actually winds up killing in the movie. And I remember when it first came out, I felt it was almost a bit of propaganda to make people afraid of survivors or being one, like, oh, remember to forget, like, you don't want to be this guy, so that whole reinforcement agenda. But I was watching this from the perspective of a practitioner, like, first of all, how are they depicting him? How does he end up like this? Why does he do what he does? And part of the themology that comes out in that film is, there are people that are being prepared to be the strong ones that are going to survive, and that's why they have to go through pain and torture. Like the girl that he doesn't end up killing is a survivor herself from an incest-based uncle family situation, and that comes out in the film as well. It's like, yeah, she's been abused all her life, and he basically discerns her to be someone special, one of the strong ones that's, like him. And so there's the theme right there. Of course they tell you their philosophies, and I just, I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, typical.
Mm-hmm.
Very. One thing I made a note of is that these guys, they are addicted to violence. It's almost like pornography. It's because it's never enough. So it's a progressive. You start out with a little, but it has to be more and more and more and more. And I think our country, maybe even our government, is full of people that have been caught up in this stuff. And it is like the pornography. I think it is for sale, and it's out there, and people do get addicted to it. So it's sad.
Wow.
So I wanted to talk about when we finished this session, I saw some parts that I had that were in what looked like a prison, a huge prison facility. I could see it from the air. I could see the roof of it, and it was just massive. And it had barbed wire around and around and around. I mean, all around it. And I could see my parts inside of it, but I couldn't communicate with them. But we ran out of time, so we decided, well, we'll just, tackle that next time. So when we had our next session, before we had the next session, I had just like a 20-second experience of feeling what those parts were feeling about me. So I'm on the outside of the barbed wire fence. They're on the inside in a laboratory. And it came to me that they saw me as an avatar, which I thought was really interesting that they would see me that way. I don't really have much to say about that, and I just thought it was interesting. I threw it in. So we came into the session, and I told you I could see the facility and the barbed wire all around, and it had an Ouroboros, snake with its head. It's eating its tail, the Ouroboros. I saw that in a great big image all the way around the base of this facility. And so you prayed for that, and Jesus said he was going to chop its head off, and he did. He chopped its head off. And so anyway, I came into, at the same time that this Ouroboros got taken out, those parts that were in the top of this prison or whatever it was actually turned out to be a lab, I guess, but they got taken up to heaven. So by the time we got through the barbed wire and ended up in the first floor of this place, they were already taken up to heaven. The Ouroboros was gone, along with a whole bunch of entities that were in like a moat around this thing. I mean, it was armored up with all kinds of things. And so I found myself just standing in the middle of this great big huge room that had been vacated, but it had all these computer cabinets in it. And there were 7 of them in total. And so after some conferring with Jesus, we found out, well, they were portals underneath these computer cabinets. And so you prayed, and all the computer cabinets were taken out and taken up to heaven to be analyzed or whatever.
And let me just repeat this for anyone that got lost here. Jan is talking about a building that exists inside of her system, meaning it's not physical outside of her front door. This building is in, you could say inside of her mind, but really it's inside of her subconscious. It's inner system. It's where her parts are, and we are navigating this place. So just wanted to say that. Please continue.
And I will have to add to that from my perspective, it seemed like it was on another location, like another planet or somewhere outside of my system. Even though I know it was in my system, it feels like it's somewhere else. It doesn't feel like it's inside. It feels like it's outside. So I just throw that in because that's sometimes I actually connect and know that it's inside, but sometimes it feels like it's outside. So it's really hard to discern sometimes where the place is. But anyway,
Well, and
so
I have to say this, Jan, not to interrupt, but you know, because I always come back when I hear folks say, because now I'm remembering, and honestly, it could be both, right? If it's on another planet, sometimes it's superimposed, almost like a refraction into the system. It gets really wonky when you get into the astral and the dimensional stuff. But anyway, folks, just follow the story.
I'll just add to that one too, because in this case, it did end up being both because those portals led to places outside, I think. So there was, and that happens a lot of times too. You can have a place in the system, but it has a portal that goes somewhere else. So you end up on Mars, going through a place in your system. So anyway, that's not uncommon at all, at least in the work I've been doing. So anyway, so we went down into the number 3 portal, and we got below, and I saw there were aliens, a whole bunch of aliens down there. This was a laboratory. And so you prayed, and it was no big deal at all. Those aliens were gone in a second, and there was no fight or nothing. It was just, they just peacefully went. So I found out that this was a place that was creating hybrid children. And so my parts were working there. And of course, my goal is to find out, what are my parts doing there? Why do I have parts in this place? And so I found out that the job of my parts was to go out and to find images of children that they would use to design these children that they were creating, the hybrid children. And so these hybrid children were being trained up to be used in the astral to go into different localities in the earth and to measure the level of darkness in those areas. And I've come across this before. I can't remember how long ago it was, but this wasn't a new idea for me, but it was just interesting. So these children, it came to me that these children are sent into these areas, and they take on physical form when they get there, but they're just children. So nobody pays any attention to them. So they just go about their business, do their jobs, and then they come back in the astral to this facility. And so it was told to me that their lifespans are very short because they are hybrids, and they don't, they just don't last that long. So it also came to me that they don't really do training on the children. They just come under computer downloads. So they're just programmed through, direct downloads on the computer. You ask if the DNA needed to be removed. And it came to me that these children were formed out of the pools of DNA, that it wasn't a one-on-one. In other words, they didn't have the DNA of a person sitting somewhere to make each child. It was all pooled together. And then they drew out of that to create this whole range of children. So you asked if there was anything else that needed to be addressed. And Jesus indicated that there were parts deeper down in this facility So we ended up going down to another floor. And when we got down there, there were a whole bunch of doors that were shut. But I was aware that there were entities, a lot of entities behind these doors. And so I think you directed angels to stand guard at each door. And so we started opening these doors to see what entities were inside. So it turned out that Jesus said, you asked Jesus if you could interview or question some of these entities. And he said, well, yeah, he'd pull out one from each door that you could interview. And I'm just like, oh no. Every time Dan wants to interview some entity or alien or being of some sort, I'm the one that has to interpret it. And so I was just, oh my goodness, I can't believe we're doing this. So I told Dan, I said, they don't speak English. It didn't bother him one bit. He said, that's okay. I have a translator. We'll just put it on their mouths. And so as soon as he said that, I saw these guys all being fitted out with like what looked like to be a gas mask. So now they had the translators on. So it turned out that the first one was an alien from Uranus Plagius. And so Dan asked him what his business was on Earth, and he said that he'd been there mining, that he came to Earth to mine zinc, and they got captured. And so Dan asked him what his relationship was to Satan, and he said he didn't have a relationship to Satan, that he was a prisoner of Satan, basically. And so they had been here to do this mining, and they got stranded. Thousands. I couldn't figure out if it's thousands or millions, but it was a long time ago. And so so they've been in this prison ever since, inside my system somehow. And so anyway, Dan asked King Jesus, did this visitor have a redemption plan before Yahweh? And Jesus said, they're one of millions of races that inhabit the cosmos, and they're a mixture of light and dark beings, and they're from millennia past, and they have no direct affiliation to either side now. So they were basically neutral beings. And so he said they were hybrids in a sense. And he said that where they came from has moved on to a more redemptive lifestyle. So basically he was released to the angels. The angels took him back to his home, wherever that was. So the next one was some character called Robustu Bar. And his business on Earth was they were actually from the future, and they came back to Earth from into the past, and then they got caught and they got imprisoned. And so they're actually time travelers. And so they had been here for, again, who knows how many years, a lot of years. And so do you remember what you said?
No. No.
Well, I happen to have it here. He said, you said, I just marvel at the hilarious nature of being rescued from your imprisonment as a future citizen by me in the spirit out of your system, Jan. This is just ridiculous. I'm certain he should have just stayed home and had pancakes.
That sounds like something I would say. That really does. Yes. I am certain that that was my response. Pancakes. Come on now. Pancakes never go out of style. I don't care how far in the future. Pancakes, man. Especially gluten-free.
That guy, after being in prison for thousands of years, was probably ready for a pancake, probably. But at the end of that little session, you ask about redemption, and shouldn't we be giving them tracts or something, or, instead of just sending them home, and would they even be, would they even be qualified for redemption, through Jesus? And so it came out that that the Lord said that human beings are redeemed through Jesus. He's our redemption. But other races throughout the cosmos have other, he called them overlords, other priest overlords that they actually go through on their way back to Yahweh. So I thought that was really interesting, and a whole new concept in redemption and what that means. But I thought it was pretty clear from the way he put it, was that we are special. The human race is special in that we have Jesus and a direct route to the Father through Jesus Christ, and that we're the only race that has that provision. And so that was kind of neat, really. I kind of like that. And this guy said that was one of the reasons why they like a lot of the races in the cosmos try to come to Earth. It's because they know there's something different about humans. They don't know what it is, but when they become technically advanced enough to be able to do the time travel and so forth, they do like to come here to try to understand what it is about Earth that's special. And of course, we know it's special because we're special, because we're part of God's plan. So I think I got done, Dan.
You kind of did. I think that there might be a few parts you skipped over, but I'm just giving you a hard time. Folks, what Jan just said is a massive bomb drop. It's a massive bomb drop. And, we talked briefly before the podcast. She's like, I just don't know if I should go there. And I'm just like, Jan, I don't care if you go there. Because it happened. We had this conversation with these entities. They were taken away. They were taken back to the future. They were taken back to the original planet. They were, the angels were involved. Jesus was there, and there was information that came forth. And one of the questions that I get often is, okay, Daniel, well, if there are these alien beings, then where do they come from, and where is their redemption? If they're not fallen angels per se, but there's something else, then how do they get saved? Should we give them gospel tracts? And I'm thinking the same thing, right? I don't know. Like there's certain areas of the conversation that are just very, very blurry. And you go into the Bible, you go into the Word of God, and you learn this, that mankind is the crown of creation. Jesus Christ is our high priest. Man, there are mysteries in man that angels desire to look into. We learn all of these things, but we don't necessarily understand from the Bible what dealings Yahweh God has with Rigel or one of these other areas. Like, that's just not clearly spelled out. And so it seems like the veil on some of these mysteries is getting thinner, at least in the work that involves survivors, because for whatever reason, their systems, like Jan's system, is plugged into these realities. And freedom in Christ means addressing these issues. And suddenly, the mysteries of creation begin to unravel, and you end up with more data points that leave you with more questions than answers. And that's exactly how we're going to leave you at the end of this podcast. More questions than answers. Jan, would you like to say anything else?
Dan, I think you've said it all. Thank you so much. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to share, and I hope people can figure out what I've said because I have skipped around a little bit. So anyway, but it was good. It was wonderful. It's always good to work with you, and I always love to be able to share my testimony and hope that other people will be able to glean some little piece of information that might help them along on their journeys, because we're all on this journey together. So thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jan. Folks, until next time, God bless and Godspeed. You've been listening to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and share this with friends. This podcast is a production of Bride Ministries International. Visit our website at brideministriesinternational.com to enjoy the Bride Ministries Church, the Bride Ministries Institute, free resources, and to support us financially.